Hey FCF, we are finishing out this section in Philippians chapter 4, and remember it has an awful lot to do with retaining a strong, healthy inner condition because of our reliance on Christ, even though we may be in less than ideal circumstances for an indefinite period of time. I say that kind of regularly because there's a part of it that's very uncomfortable for us. If I'm in less than ideal circumstances, but I know it's only going to last a day or 2 days or a week. In other words, I'm going to be in pain. Let's say I had a surgical procedure and I know, okay, you're going to be in pain for 2 days, 3 days. There's a start and there's a stop. That's one thing. Usually we can grit it out and get through that. But if I'm in an uncomfortable, less than ideal circumstance, an undesirable circumstance for an indefinite period of time, meaning I don't know when this is going to end. I don't even know if this is going to end. That is really hard for a human being. We like stops and starts. When it's uncertain, we need nothing less than the power of God to sustain us minute to minute, because that's how we have to start learning to live. We have to start learning minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. We dare not try to go too far in the future. That's where life can become reduced to sometimes, but that's not the end of the world. We lie to ourselves and we convince ourselves that if certain conditions occur, if we have to take 2 steps back, whatever that means in life, or 3 steps back, or if a whole set of unpleasantries occur, we lie to ourselves when we say, I wouldn't be able to live, I'd be miserable the rest of my life, I couldn't go on. Well, that's not true at all. God has given us tremendous resilience, tremendous adaptability, but we cannot do this in a healthy way apart from union with Christ, dependence upon Him at these critical junctures. Now, Paul is going to bring up the subject of contentment. Now, remember, he's chained around the clock. He doesn't know if he's going to be executed or not. He is kept from traveling and preaching Christ, which is his heart's desire, for 2 whole years. But he's going to share something that he's learned through his circumstances. So here we go. He says, finally, verse 11, I got in the wrong place. He says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need. The Philippians had sent him some resources, some help and so forth, financial and probably some food. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned. That's an important part. He was not born with this. It wasn't instantaneous. He had to learn it by experience. He says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance, less than ideal circumstances for an indefinite period of time. I know what it is to be in need. Stop right there. This is the number one servant of God on the planet. And he is confessing, there were times in my life where my needs were not met. All right? So does this mean that God forgot him? Does this mean that God was angry at him? Did this mean that God was punishing him? Did this mean that God was untrustworthy? Paul is not even giving any credence to any thoughts like that. Not at all. He says, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret. That's an interesting construction here in the original language. He's saying, I've literally been initiated. It's a secret initiation. By going through times of having needs and them not being met, by going through times of having more than I need, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry. Paul literally went without food at times, whether living in plenty or in want. There's lots of different kinds of wants. There can be wants of friendship, there can be wants of physical comfort, there can be wants, of love, there can be wants just to be understood. I mean, there's all kinds of wants. He says, I've been in want. And then he concludes with this in verse 13. He says, I've learned, in other words, he's saying, by experience, by going through all this stuff, I can do all this through Him, meaning Christ, who gives me strength. So here is Paul saying one last piece to the antidote to worry. We lie to ourselves and say, if I don't always have these conditions in my life, if I don't always have this something, if I don't always have this someone, if I don't always have certain conditions, I just don't know how I'd live. I would be so miserable. And Paul is saying, that is absolutely untrue. Paul is saying, you don't have to be afraid of anything, Christian. Come hell or high water, you can learn by God's grace to be content. And what Paul is saying is, as he went through these things, he learned the secret. It was when he actually went through them For example, let's emphasize the times of want. Those are the ones we dread the most. He said, I learned it wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be. It didn't destroy me. It didn't rip me to shreds. It didn't depress me. I clung to Christ. I poured out my heart to Him. I thanked Him for what He's doing and done. I poured out my petitions to Him, and I stopped worrying, and I started reminding myself of all the goodness that lays ahead that Christ has for me. Since He rose, He's going to keep all His promises. And I just learned that I could derive energy and comfort and strength enough from Christ that even in the times when I would have loved to have had more, but I didn't, it wasn't as bad as I expected. This is what we do to ourselves. We think that certain circumstances will be impossible for us to endure, and it's just not the truth. God gives us an amazing resiliency, amazing adaptability. Doesn't mean that we want to stay there, but it does mean we can stay there and, like Paul, say, I've learned to be content because Christ is always with me. He'll never leave me. He'll never forsake me, no matter what I'm going through. I know that He promises it's helping me to grow. It's helping to mold and shape my character. It may be expanding my opportunities to share Christ with people that I'd never get an opportunity to had I not gone through this particular experience. By the way, Paul says in the early parts of the book of Philippians, because of his chains, he was able to get Christ into the Praetorian Guard, meaning Caesar's guards. They're chained to Paul all day. They hear him preaching and teaching people, so he's evangelizing them. They can't get away from it, and it's penetrating the very courts of Caesar's household. So sometimes we go through things that we don't like, but it's putting us around people or in a certain condition that's going to unlock the doorway to a conversation with somebody who has also gone through that condition. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we have to remind ourselves of all these things. We're never out of control. God's always with us, for us. He's always at work. It just doesn't mean that we're always going to be necessarily comfortable in the ideal way that we would want to. But we can learn that we can be content, and it's not going to be nearly as bad as we think, because Christ is always with us, and He strengthens us. Okay, FCF, I hope this helps you, because sooner or later we all go through those less than ideal circumstances for an indefinite period of time. We'll pick it up again next week. Thank you very much.